Hi, James. Here's my 3 stories for today. The first one is called Tarzan. The second one is Salamanders. And the third one is A Job That Had to Be Done. So Tarzan, you probably don't know him, but he was on TV and he was a man that lived in the jungle. And he would swing on ropes and swing on vines, and he just learned to live in the jungle and learn how to provide for himself there. Well, my grandparents had a great big barn, and in it was cows and tractors and things like that. Well, but it also had one cool thing. It had a great big center floor and big doors that would open out to the outside, so that if a tractor or a big piece of equipment had to get in the barn, they could do it through those big doors. But also across the back of the barn was a big beam, like a balance beam. It was about 10 feet high, so it was pretty high. And we were allowed to play on that. So we would walk across the beam like it was a balance beam, do tricks on it, even though we were 10 feet up in the air. And then my grandpa did something really cool. He hung a great big fat rope all the way from the top of the barn. And then he had a hook that would connect it to that beam. So we could crawl across the beam, and then we could grab a hold of that big rope and we could fly like Tarzan all the way through the front doors. And if we pushed hard enough, we'd actually land all the way back onto the beam. We had so much fun doing that. When I think back on it, it was pretty dangerous, and I'm kind of surprised our parents let us do it, but I'm glad I got to do it, and it made me strong, and it made me think creative. And sometimes we have to take risks in our play, and we might get hurt, we might fall. We have to use our brain and our common sense, but have fun when you play. Salamanders. On really hot days, one of my favorite things to do was go down to the creek that I told you about in another story, and we would hunt salamanders, which were like little lizards. Sometimes I'd go by myself, and sometimes I'd be with my sister or a friend, and we'd take glass jars that had lids on them, and I would look for flat, fairly large rocks that weren't too deep into the ground, and I would pick them up. And more often than not, this little lizard, salamander, would be underneath that rock, and he would try to get down into his little hole. And I would use my hands and try to scoop it up, and if I did succeed in scooping it up, it would be in my hands, and it would be moving around trying to escape, and it'd just tickle like crazy, and I'd laugh and laugh. And sometimes it would escape, but sometimes I would put it into the glass jar. But just for a while. I always released it before I went home because I wanted him to live. And it made me think now that how God has given us all kinds of creatures to enjoy. And we should look at them and delight in them, worms and snakes and weird insects and butterflies and so many different things. So that's my story about salamanders. And then finally, a story that I don't know if you'll understand this one or not. It's called A Job That Had to Be Done. Well, we lived on a farm and we had cows. And so cows eat hay and grass and corn, stuff like that. Well, and they poop a lot. So when the cows were in the barn, especially in the winter when it was too cold for them to be outside, they pooped in the barn, and it would build up. We called it manure. So manure was just a bunch of cow poop. And my grandpa had a manure spreader that you hooked onto a tractor. And every once in a while we had to clean that out, and it was pretty smelly, and we used a tool called a pitchfork. It had these sharp prongs on it, and you'd pick up the manure and you'd throw it into the manure spreader. And then once it was full, the tractor would pull that manure spreader out to the field and it would put it on the crops, which was a very natural fertilizer for the crops. And believe it or not, I enjoyed doing that. It was smelly, but maybe because it was usually considered a man's job, but I got to do it. So I would you had to pull on big rubber boots that came up past your knees and hop into the manure and just start shoveling it into the manure spreader. And sometimes we just have jobs that stink, but they're part of who we are. They're part of being humans, and we just have to deal with the mess. So we can gripe and complain about it, or we can pull on our boots and get to work. And hopefully we turn that mess into something good. All right, James, talk to you later. Love you.